Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Battlefield Breakdown, brought to you by Tournament Sideways. I'm Blevins, and we've got a big episode this week. We've got a lot of tournaments to talk about. We've got 2 regional opens to talk about from Beijing and Chongqing, as well as another RiftLab Clash. So we will get into that in just a second. But before we do, make sure you are liking and subscribing to the channel. Here we've got a lot of stuff going on. We've got the winning point, which I'm sure many of you know about, with myself, Casanova, Charmer, and Pastry Time. We're talking all things Riftbound, not just tournaments. This is just tournament talk here on Battlefield Breakdown. We've got all sorts of stuff in the Riftbound world on that show, as well as other things that are coming in the pipeline soon. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel for all sorts of amazing Riftbound content. But let's jump right in to the tournaments. We had RiftLab Clash number 3 this week. And of course, if you did not know about the format for this, this is basically not a qualifier tournament, but basically a showcase event to get buys into the RiftLab trials, which are coming up in a couple of weeks here. We will have a link to all of that in the show notes. So if you want to play in the RiftLab trials or in upcoming RiftLab clashes, you can sign up for those. But we've got the 4-0. We had at 4-0. I won't go through every single deck here, but the 4-0 decks from this week were Kai'Sa, Annie, and 2 Darius decks. The deck that I did want to actually go a little bit more in depth for is this Annie deck, piloted by Prismaticism. Early pioneers of the Darius Hook deck. We've seen them play Miss Fortune Aurora, and now they are on Annie here, playing a very aggressive version of Annie. We see, of course, the purple Annie and Annie Stubborn as the chosen champion here. When you play me, return a spell from your trash to your hand. So playing a lot of different removal spells. Of course, we're seeing everything that you would expect to see. Void Seeker, Hextech Ray, of course. We've got Cleaves. But we also are running Incinerates, which is a great card with Annie. Of course, your Annie Legend allows you to, at the end of turn, ready 2 runes. So you're just always going to have the resources to play an Incinerate at end of turn, or even a Flash, a Ride the Wind, a Fight or Flight. You're just always going to have access to those, or at least the resources to play those if you have them in hand. And really the whole point of this deck is to get points and get them fast, finish the game with a Vi and a Ride the Wind. You're running the mainstays in Angie, aka Fury. You've got the full complement of Kai'Sa survivors. You've got the full complement of Darius Trifarians, and even some interesting additions here, like the Legion Rearguard, which allows you to accelerate early. We even have Sneaky Deckhand, which effectively has accelerate in a way. It can be played directly to an open battlefield, so you're going to try to get ahead as Annie, hold that advantage with your cheap spells, and end the game with a late game Vi after you've cycled through your deck with Stack Deck and all of the spells. So really a very cool list here from Prismaticism in Annie. So if you're looking for other decks to play, this is an interesting one to choose. And to wrap up the RiftLab Clash talks here, obviously the regional events are going to be the main focus of this episode, so I won't spend too much time on the RiftLab Clash, but a very interesting tournament series because we're seeing lower stakes, obviously, than the in-person official Riot regionals in China, but we're seeing some more experimentation. Obviously, the Annie here, we saw 2 Dariuses do well. We've seen other decks do well in these events. There's a Yasuo deck floating around out there, played by Gale Wins of the Discord and of other Riftbound content out there, playing a Yasuo deck that we've really not seen really anyone do well with or really even bring. So Gale Wins, there's a match on the RiftLab YouTube channel that features that deck. It really performing, and you get a full showcase of that deck. So definitely check that out on the RiftLab channel. But really, we're seeing decks that aren't just Kai'Sa and Master Yi in these events. People are experimenting. I don't know if it's necessarily the in-person nature of it, the high stakes, the different region in China really honing in on Kai'Sa and Yi versus the other decks. But we're seeing a bit more experimentation on the TTS events so far in English. We'll have to see how the region as a whole shapes once we get to full release at the end of October. But that is probably about all we're going to talk about in terms of non-Master Yi and Kai'Sa as we move into the two regionals that we had these past 2 weeks. Of course, it didn't have an episode last week, but we had the Beijing regional 2 weekends ago, and then last weekend we had the Chongqing regional. A little bit of a spoiler. Well, this is an entire spoiler, but a spoiler for those two events. 1st through 8th for both events were nothing but Master Yi and Kai'Sa. In Beijing, it was Kai'Sa, Master Yi, Kai'Sa, Yi, Kai'Sa, Kai'Sa. And in Chongqing, it was Kai'Sa, Master Yi, Kai'Sa, Master Yi, Kai'Sa, Master Yi, Kai'Sa, Kai'Sa. So 4-4 in Beijing, 5-3 in favor of Kai'Sa in Chongqing. Let's take a look at the first place Kai'Sa deck from the Beijing regional here. Purposely wanted to wait a week and condense this into one episode because we really get to look at the differences that happened from one major event to another in 1 week. So really excited to look at this. We're seeing this Kai'Sa deck here. We're seeing Targon's Peak, Void Gate, and Reaver's Row for the battlefields here. We're seeing a full complement of Kai'Sa survivors. We're seeing Ravenbloom students. I mean, this is very stock and standard. Out of left field card here is the one of Progress Day in the main deck. Outside of that, everything else are cards that you would expect to see in a Kai'Sa deck. The numbers, a 2 of here versus a 3 of here is up in the air. One thing that sort of came from this event, we saw it a little bit in Guangzhou the first week, but is really sort of become a standard starting with this Beijing event, is the 3x Noxus Hopeful to really effectively be an additional 2-drop and one of the best 2 energy plays that you can make in a deck that has a lot of good ones. The Noxus Hopeful just always having 4 might, really, really strong. And the Kai'Sa deck, I mean, at this point, we know what it does. It gets early board presence. It has the best spells in the game. It has some of the best units in Kai'Sa and Darius to end the game, keep card advantage going, destroy your opponent's units, drawing cards the entire way there. It is the inarguably strongest deck in the format right now, and this is a very strong list. This is what was the paradigm going into Chongqing. But before we get to that, let's look at the second place Master Yi deck from Beijing here. Now, this was sort of setting the standard for Master Yi from Guangzhou and Beijing here. We're seeing White Flame Protectors. We're seeing Carnivorous Snapvines. Of course, the full complement of Kiana's Primal Strengths. Zhonya's Hourglass was a card that really solidified itself. Every single Yi in the top 8 ran the full complement of Zhonya's Hourglasses in this event. Of course, everything else is quite standard here, with the Sunlit Guardian being a little bit of a meta pick here. You don't always see the Sunlit Guardian, but, one card off, not being anything too crazy to write home about here. And of course, we're seeing the Grove of the God Willow, Dreaming Tree, and Obelisk of Power really sort of being the standard for Master Yi for their battlefield breakdown, if you will. So those were the 2 archetypes from Beijing. The rest of the lists were very similar iterations to these 2 decks for Beijing. So I will have my full analysis of both of the events after we take a look at Chongqing results, starting off with the Kai'Sa deck played by George, who we've been following actually through all of these Chinese regionals. They are an American player. I believe they're known as Goofy from Lorcana. I know Casanova has been talking with them, and a little bit of a spoiler here. Keep an eye out for an interview coming up on the Turn 'em Sideways YouTube channel here with George. Well, they did top 4, and in fact, top 1'd here with this, I would consider, innovative Kai'Sa deck. Now, if we remove the the lens and the bias of, oh, everything is Master Yi and Kai'Sa. Okay, I get that. Get that out of your system. Go scream into your pillow now. That's fine. I get it. I've already done it. We're going to now go into this and analyze it for what it is, which is a meta in a meta in a meta in a meta, which is the Master Yi Kai'Sa meta. And we've seen an evolution of the decks from week to week. So additional 2 drops here. We've got the Pouty Poro, 2 Kai'Sas, only 2 Darius Trifarian, which is another interesting choice as well. Usually seeing the full 3 Dariuses and sometimes a full 3 Kai'Sas. We are seeing Dr. Mundo in the main deck. An interesting choice. It is a mirror breaker in a sense. It's also very good against Master Yi. Master Yi really does not have good ways to deal with a 30 might Mundo. And the thing that really caught my eye watching the coverage. Of course, you can watch the English rebroadcast right here on the Turn 'em Sideways YouTube channel as well. Wink. But what really caught my eye on the coverage was the fact that this Kai'Sa was choosing Zon Warrens as their first battlefield, which means they're able to churn through their deck even faster than Kai'Sa already is, which means Dr. Mundo, you're going to A, get to your Dr. Mundo faster. B, your Mundo is going to be even bigger because you're running the Zon Warrens. You're able to have these 15, 20, 25 might Mundos that Master Yi just can't do anything against except hope that they can charm it away and not lose from destroying the other battlefield. That is the only way George would sideboard the Mundo out in game 2 because they're not running Zon Warrens. This is a piece of innovation in deck building and deck choice and playing the decks that is really opened my eyes to how great Riftbound is and how great Riftbound and deck building can be and can be explored. I didn't even think about having a specific game 1 battlefield, and not only just the game 1 battlefield, cards that you sideboard out and in based on what battlefield you're picking, if you're going first or second. Like, this is all stuff that we've just started to scratch the surface of in terms of deck building and in terms of stylistic and play choice. And I'm really excited to see how this evolves, not only in this set and as we get better as a community, but also as new cards come out, that we're going to be thinking through this a new lens that we wouldn't be thinking about necessarily if we're playing other card games. So it wasn't just the Kai'Sa that was innovating here, and it wasn't just the first place Kai'Sa. We also have the second place deck in the Master Yi that has a card that I think if you asked a lot of players what this card did before this event, they might not be able to answer exactly, but we have 3 tasty Fey folks in the main deck for Master Yi. This is a 7 energy 6 might unit with Accelerate that has Death Knell, channel 2 runes exhausted, and draw 1. So we've got a go tall Yi going even bigger. We're seeing the Aspirant's Climb and the Obelisk of Power, in addition to the Grove of the God Willow, saying, hey, this is a go late Master Yi. You've already got sort of the early game down with your normal slew of 2-drops, your Pit Rookies, your Stalwart Poros, Clockwork Keepers. You've got the mid game with Kiana and First Mate, and then we're just going tall. We've got the full complement of White Flame Protectors. We've got the full complement of Tasty Fae folks, and Big Daddy Dead Bloom also in the main deck as a 3 of just the Master Yi saying, if we're going late, which by battlefields are going to try to allow me to do, we're going to win the game. We saw that obviously work out very well up until the final rounds of the tournament. And by the way, 3x Find Your Center, which is a ramp card that is in mind that we've really not seen outside. I really haven't seen it since the very first weeks of Riftbound, but a card that allows you to draw cards and channel runes and costs even less if your opponent has more victory points. So really 2 lists, the 2 sort of meta list, Kai'Sa and Master Yi, not just coming in with the same exact list as the previous weeks and playing. Really exciting to see even this small sample size. I mean, we saw literally top 8 of the last 2 events have been nothing but Kai'Sa and Yi, and still finding an interesting meta to create out of that is very exciting for me. Now, I wanted to take a look at conversion rates overall, because we had some interesting changes here in terms of conversion rates. So from Beijing to Chongqing, we've got the graphic up here. You can see Kai'Sa actually did slightly worse in terms of conversion rate. And just for a little bit of clarity, because I've seen some talks about conversion rate and having different people use different terms for it, which is fine. But just for clarity here, I'm talking about percentage of the decks that entered on day 1 getting into day 2. So if you had 100 decks enter on day 1 and 50 of them made it to day 2, that would be a 50% conversion rate. So Kai'Sa in Beijing had a 22.2% conversion rate. In Chongqing, only a 14% conversion rate, which of course is still very strong and was the most represented deck in the room, but still about 8% drop there. Master Yi in Beijing had about 11% conversion rate, and now almost doubled it up to 18.4. So a sizable increase in conversion rate percentage here. Very, very interesting here. These are just little things that I'm noticing, digging a little bit deeper into the stats, seeing not just, Kai'Sa Yi, okay, Snorefest. There's actually, when you look a little bit deeper, when you peel back the pages a little bit, you can see a bit of a different story. So we've got one more event in Hangzhou. Which Kai'Sa list is going to win this week, and which Master Yi deck is going to have half of the top 8? Very possible. Obviously we saw the Lux day 2. I think that's going to inspire some people to bring other decks to the event. We saw Misfortune have quite decent conversion numbers across the day. We saw a Misfortune do quite well. I believe they top 32, maybe top 64. A good number of Misfortune Auroras do well. There's room for a couple of the top 8 slots to be non-Master Yi and Kai'Sa. I'm not going to try to say that there's an undiscovered deck that is going to completely sweep the format. I don't personally think that right now. I think Kai'Sa and Master Yi are both heavily optimized to the point where it's going to be very hard to crack that. And it's not going to be something that's just glaringly missing and that we've overlooked. I don't think, at least. It's going to be something very specific, played excessively well, that may be able to crack some real numbers into the top 8. On that note, I wanted to talk a little bit about the tournament itself and the on-camera performance of players and also the judge staff. This is something that was really talked about during the live stream, is something I felt very much so. One, the first thing is we're seeing suboptimal plays at certain points in time on the live stream and in the event, which I'm not holding against anyone. As someone who has played on camera before in other games, it is something that there's an added level of pressure that is really hard to understand until you've been there. It's really easy to see the perfect play when you're sitting on your computer watching the event. And it's a lot harder to see when the cameras are on you. And it's a brand new game. As much as we have been in the weeds with it for many weeks now, it is a brand new game. It is potentially the first time that people are playing in-person tournaments. It's the first time that they're playing on camera. So this is not to slam anyone for having suboptimal or sloppy play. I'm not trying to do that. What I'm saying is that we have not even, I would imagine, scratched the surface in terms of hyper optimized, super tight play in Riftbound. I'm not trying to say that players are bad. What I'm trying to say is that we've got a lot of room as an entire community to level up. We've seen some players on the broadcast that clearly have put in a lot of work and are playing at a very, very high level. And we've seen players that are and heard stories of players that this is their first event and that they picked up the game a couple of weeks ago, built a deck at their LGS, and are playing in a high level event. That's an amazing story. What I'm trying to say is there's a lot of room to grow in terms of player skill, in terms of understanding of the game, in terms of how we play, how we evaluate the game, all of that stuff. And it's all positive, by the way. That is all positive. The one thing I did want to talk about, because a lot of people have been talking about it on the live stream in the Discord, just internally from what I've seen, is the way that the live events have been handled from a judge perspective. We saw multiple times in day 2 of both events where it seemed like judges were handling rulings inconsistently, or at the very least, it was being handled in a confusing way from a viewer perspective. There's a couple of ways to view this. It could be, obviously, as myself and many others that were watching the English or part of the English rebroadcast, there's a language barrier. We don't understand what is being said. We can't hear everything. Even if we did understand, even if they were speaking English, we don't hear everything on the broadcast. What we end up seeing is players potentially missing triggers or playing quote unquote sloppy in terms of sequencing and formatting for plays, and having the game outcome be changed possibly based on a judge ruling. I think there's a lot of different and varying opinions on this in the community, and I will lend mine for what it's worth, which is not a whole lot, but I'm coming from a competitive standpoint from playing Magic many, many years ago, playing Flesh and Blood years ago as well. So this is an old school, coming from an older school of play. On the one hand, if you're playing at a professional REL, rules enforcement level, or whatever they call it for Riftbound, at the highest level, you got to play tight. You've got to play properly. That goes without saying. And I'm not advocating for people playing sloppy and getting away with it every time and having the game be played in a sloppy way at a high level. Not advocating for that. On the other hand, there are certain things in terms of shortcutting, in terms of there's a social element, which is, from my understanding, what Riftbound wants to have, is this social element, almost like a social contract of, I know, you know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm doing, and I know what you're doing, so we don't need to say, okay, I enter my awaken phase. Do you have a response? Okay. We don't need to be robots about it. We can go, all right, I'm going to go through this. I'm going to draw my card here. I'm going to awaken my runes. Are we good? Like, you don't need to go, okay, trigger here, trigger here, trigger here. Now, technically in the rules, you should do that. But I think my opinion is that there are certain shortcuts that are obvious, and if you are a human being using your brain, looking at them and go, oh, this is what was meant by it, okay, that is a fine thing to do. Having the judges come in and stop the match when the players are fine with it and know what's happening and no game actions have happened, to stop the match and enforce something that it has no reason to be enforced because something was technically done at a slightly different step, but it has no impact on the game, is something that I think is a negative, not only for the player experience there, but also from a viewing experience. People are going to watch events and see this and not want to play in them because people don't want to feel pressured to have this perfect sequence of plays all the time. And also it creates a scenario where if there's a missed trigger, it is now on the opponent to decide, oh, should the player get that or not? And then you're put into a scenario where, from a optimization of wanting to win perspective, you have to tell them no, even though you might not want to do that from a playing the game perspective. So I think there's a fine line between shortcutting and sloppy play, and I think we want to be on the side of having tight play and solid play and playing correctly. But also, I think that there's wiggle room to have shortcuts and an understanding, as long as the game ends up being played properly and people aren't trying to cheat, which I don't think anyone that we've seen on stream has been. for the record. But I think as long as the game is being played properly, whether it's at the exact perfect sequencing, I'm fine with that personally. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. I forgot that I was going to do this segment and then just jumped into it. So I've been kind of stream of consciousnessing it. But I think it's important to talk about, especially as we're early on into competitive Riftbound and we haven't quite gotten to English release. So there's things that we can improve for future broadcasts and for future events. So let me know in the comments what you think about that whole situation. And we'll talk more about it on Battlefield Breakdown as well as even on the winning point. But that is going to be it for Beijing, for Chongqing, and for RiftLab Clash number 3. We've got Hangzhou coming up this weekend. Very excited to see what happens in that final Chinese regional here. But that is going to be it for Battlefield Breakdown episode 5 here. Again, please, if you haven't already, like the video, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really does help out the channel. And yeah, that is going to be it for Battlefield Breakdown number 5. I have been Blevins, and we'll see you next week.